Applause for having done nothing. That's the best kind. Thanks for coming out this afternoon. I'm Jay Jennings. I'm the moderator for this panel, and we're going to spend a beautiful fall football Saturday inside with these two brilliant minds. As a former walk-on football player at Vanderbilt, I would in previous years have welcomed a conflict like this, like moderating a discussion at a book festival that would take me away from the kickoff of the game between the Commodores and the Alabama Crimson Tide, which is happening as I speak. For most of the history of that game, the kickoff was the beginning of the preordained end, usually an Alabama blowout. Now for Vanderbilt, currently 5-0, times have changed, largely thanks to a charismatic quarterback named Diego Pavia, who is playing his 6th year of college football, making an estimated $2 million from NIL, name, image, and likeness deals, and has Vanderbilt in the top 20 for only the 3rd time in almost 70 seasons. Football rosters often number around 100 players, but it's clear, and has been clear for a very long time, that no player is more important than the quarterback. Both of the books by our authors today, Eli Cranor, to my immediate left, and Seth Wickersham, former quarterbacks themselves, explore the singular role the quarterback plays, not just in the game of football, but in the communities that surround both college and professional teams, and in the culture at large. The best quarterbacks, Seth writes in his book, American Kings, the biography of the quarterback, are often maniacal and fragile, controlling and pouty, both the only adult in the room and a grown child.
That's all the intro I needed. So.
His book reminded me not so much of any other book about sports, but of one like Mark Kurlansky's Salt or Dava Sobel's Latitude, in which a writer takes a deep dive into a subject so fundamental that it seems always to have been there, and shines a light on it with such skill that we see it in new ways. I'll never watch a football game the same way again after reading his intensely reported, sublimely perceptive, often harrowing, and even poetic book. Eli Cranor's riveting Mississippi Blue 42 also offers a deep dive, this one fictional, into the world and underworld of big-time college football. Nominally a crime story, like his 3 previous books, novels, it is also much more than that. A laugh-out-loud satire, a moving character study, and an exciting play-by-play big game account. In short, it has something for everyone, but it's unlike anything you've read. I can't do better to describe it than John T. Edge did when he said it delivers big laughs and bigger questions about our beloved game day rites and rituals. We are lucky that both of these former quarterbacks quit playing and turned to writing, where they can still be maniacal and fragile, controlling and pouty, but are doing it alone in home office and only in danger of paper cuts. We're certainly happy to have them here today, this beautiful fall football Saturday, to help us better understand what we watch so passionately and what we can't see that goes into the performances on the field. Please join me in welcoming Eli Cranor and Seth Wickersham. I think we'll start off by having them just talk a little bit about their books and what they hoped to accomplish and whatever they want to say about the books they're presenting here. Eli, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. So Mississippi Blue 42 is my 4th novel, and it's a departure. If you've read my first 3 books, they're very serious, very gritty, called Southern Noir, which I might have told this story before, but when that word was first used to define one of my novels in a newspaper, my dad called and said, "Son, what the hell's NAR?" And I said, I don't know, Dad, but it sounds cool. And so I don't think Mississippi Blue 42 is noir. It's much more it's satirical. Like it has to be, you know, it has to be have some dark humor in it because college football is a game, and we often forget that. But the basic pitch or the premise is that there's a rookie FBI agent named Ray Johnson, and she is fresh out of her the academy at Quantico FBI training, and she's first in her class, heart set on Joint Terrorism Task Force, doing big things, and she gets stuck on this white-collar crime, possible fraud investigation in a fictional town in Mississippi called Compson, Mississippi, and she's not happy about it at all, but she knows why, and the why is because her dad is a big-time college football coach in Arkansas. And so long story short, it takes Ray not long to understand that what's going on, and much of what her father kind of kept shielded from her, what's going on in this Mississippi town, rivals Joint Terrorism Task Force or any other she could have gotten into at FBI. So it just takes a deep dive into, it's set prior to the NIL, and that was a big point for me to make sure that I kind of showed. I love hearing everybody's opinion on NIL and what it's done to college football. And so this was kind of my reaction to that. Like, well, okay, let me show you what this world was like prior to this. Let me show you, you know, what was really going on, but that a lot of times we didn't know.
I got to say that, like, I almost laughed out loud when Jay said that we've got two quarterbacks on stage, because Ian was an actual quarterback. I was almost a decent high school quarterback in Anchorage, Alaska, of all places. But, you know, we all have a little bit of Uncle Rico in us that's very vibrant. And I became a professional sports writer. I've worked at ESPN for 25 years, which is crazy. And if you write about football at ESPN in whatever form, I do investigative stories and profiles, you know, you write about quarterbacks. And I felt like even after all this time, there was a bigger story that I hadn't told about the job. And I had done it enough, and I had cared about it enough to know that, you know, quarterback isn't something that you play. It's like something that you live. It's a lifestyle. And your entire identity gets wrapped up in it. And I wanted to know if I knew how crushed I was when I know what it's like to walk through the high school halls as a quarterback and what it's like to walk through it as not. And if it was as crushing for me as it was in my little world, what was it like for the people who do it at the highest levels? And so I wanted to write about what it's like to be a quarterback at every level, from high school to college to in the NFL, you know, and then, you know, what are the things that it builds within you? What are the things that it strips away? Every year there are about 16,000 high school starting quarterbacks in America. There's 958, I think, starters at the highest level of college football. There's 32 starters in the NFL. There's 10 that are good, and there's 3 that are, you know, future Hall of Famers. Like, what does it take to survive that winnowing? How did quarterback become the type of job that, you know, became a lifestyle? Like, what does that say about us? And then, you know, I wanted to know what it was like for the guys who do it at the highest level to live with that the rest of their life. In what ways do you hardwire yourself to be a successful quarterback? Do those things help you in life away from the game, and in which ways are they uniquely incompatible with really a content life away from the game? And so those are the things I tried to explore. And, you know, I did it mostly through the eyes of a handful of Hall of Famers and some younger quarterbacks that, you know, hopefully, you know, their journey is a rich one.
Eli, early in your book, there's a moment in the mind of quarterback Matt Talley at the end of a game that's described this way. Matt was no longer thinking, just reacting, Everything on autopilot now, movements repeated thousands of times down through the practice fields and dreams of his youth. Can each of you talk about conscious decision-making versus instinctive reaction as an important part of the game and the position? And after all, that's something that we, face as individuals in not so heightened a situation as a game, but yet how much you rely on what you've learned or what you've trained to do versus what you feel in the moment is, something we all deal with in some ways from time to time. And a quarterback just is more visible in his practice of it.
Yeah, sure. So in that scene, it really it serves as the engine that really messes everything up right off the bat and makes it all. So what's happening is Matt Talley is the starting quarterback for this fictional university, University of Central Mississippi, and he has been told to lose this football game against Southern Miss. So he is supposed, and he's done his absolute best. He's thrown interceptions, he's fumbled, and somehow they are still right at the very precipice of victory. He is a play. This last play could either win it or lose it. And he's just in this moment where he is just going to go down, and he sees Brett Favre standing in the back corner of the end zone, and Brett Favre was his childhood hero. And so instinctively, he is no longer able to just lose the game. All of this training takes over, and he ends up scoring this touchdown that makes everything kind of explode, literally.
Because he does a Brett Favre move.
He does. He pump fakes past the line of scrimmage, which Favre was really known, to get 5 yards past the line and he'd pull, yeah. But no, Jay, I don't know. I mean, I think about that a lot, this idea of split decisions. And I think something like this, like a panel, when you're having to do public speaking, we haven't really prepared for this. And sometimes, and I think that's honestly, I moderated this morning, and I think I don't like to give them questions ahead of time because there's power in just the rawness of the moment, and just having to kind of feel your way in. And so, yeah, on the field, we feel that all the time.
Well, and I think that two things. Number one, so there's a moment in my book where Rich Gannon, who was a MVP quarterback at the turn of the century, who had to learn how to play quarterback, he was a safety in college, actually, and he describes what it's like when someone says the game slows down for you. Because what does that mean? Because it really doesn't. I mean, I don't know how you felt, but it's like what happens is it gets clarified. And he made this analogy to driving. When you're first learning how to drive, you're gripping the wheel, and everything that's coming at you, you're pumping, the brakes. This car's coming, this light is about to change. You're worried about everything. And then after a while, you kind of get it. And, you can ease through the road. And he said that's what it was like. And so, yeah, you're trying to, as a quarterback, and I think as an athlete, and even as a writer, and in a lot of kind of creative jobs, you're trying to get to a place where you have this kind of lucid thought. And I'll tell a quick story from the book. So this is early 90s. Joe Montana is in San Francisco, and Steve Young is in San Francisco. And so Steve Young is the backup quarterback who's now become the starter because the great Joe Montana is injured. And Steve, I love Steve, and I've loved talking quarterback with him because he can articulate things in a way that, Brett Favre has gone through his entire life being able to throw the ball wherever he wants, whenever he wants, right? Whereas Steve had to learn how to do it. And San Francisco brought in a new offensive coordinator, Mike Shanahan, whose son is now the head coach of the Niners. And Shanahan spent 2 days alone with each quarterback. And then he brought in Joe Montana again. And he said, Joe, we got to talk because you're looking at this offense, the great Bill Walsh West Coast offense that had revolutionized football. You look at this completely different than the other guys. And Joe, who at that time kind of knew he was on his way out in San Francisco, didn't want to be and didn't trust anybody in the building, says, yeah, I was kind of hoping you would notice that. But he goes, here's what happens, is that here's my edge on Steve Young, who's younger, faster, stronger, all of these things, and is that Steve is running the offense as the great Bill Walsh drew it up. He's going from read 1 to 2 to 3 to 4 to 5, and what's happening is that maybe sometimes it produces some good plays, but what's happening is that Steve is getting hit a lot. He's holding the ball too long. And my edge on him right now is that I don't go 1 to 2 to 3. I go straight to 3 if I think that guy is going to be open, and if he's covered, I throw to my outlet, and if he's covered, I throw the ball away, and I live to fight another day. And I thought that was a really fascinating thing because it shows that being a good quarterback doesn't mean running a playbook. It means at some point you have to kind of take ownership of it and make decisions. And the best quarterbacks, I think, are these radical simplifiers. Like they see holes in the defense and creases that, other people and other quarterbacks don't see.
Let me jump in on this because when we were talking right before this, I mentioned that driving analogy. And y'all might have heard, if you're sports fans, you might have heard announcers say, the game's starting to slow down for him. And I thought that was such a good analogy that he highlights in there. But then it made me think too, just as you were talking about Malcolm Gladwell's outliers and like the whole 10,000 hour rule. And if y'all have never heard of this, he shows all these, like even the Beatles, like the reason that he claims the Beatles became the Beatles was because they got to play so much together. And then you were talking about the winnowing away of, and so like even somebody like me, who I started for 2 years in college football and essentially started like 22 full contact games of like, how much, that sort of game experience, like where you get that game, how much do you think that really goes into people becoming to making that next echelon?
Yeah, it's everything. There's no substitute for playing. And I think that, as quarterbacks, I think a lot of them live in their head. And they play these games in their head. And the only way to kind of solve that is with the action that happens on a field and, again, becoming comfortable with it. Like Kevin O'Connell, he's the head coach of the Minnesota Vikings. He was a 4-year starter in college. I think he was a 4-year captain. Got drafted into the NFL, and he's like, my career's just getting going. And he could barely hang on. And he completely wiped out in the NFL. And he kept wondering, why? Because he would get these tryouts, and he would wait for the moment where he could make, that big throw that wowed the coaches. This John Elway, Patrick Mahomes type of moment. And he would always get cut and not make the team, and he just couldn't figure out what he was doing wrong. And then when he became a coach, he went and watched all of Joe Montana's game-winning drives. There's the classic American quarterback moment, all of John Elway's, all of Tom Brady's. And what stood out was how mundane they were. Like most of them were just checking the ball down to the running back and just gaining yards. It wasn't these miraculous throws that, become etched in our minds. They were actually pretty boring. And if you look at it, that's how the quarterback saw it. Is it this is no different than practice. We're trying to gain yards on each play. And every now and then you might need to do something a little special. But it was, that's where you can tell a guy is relaxed because he's just simply doing the job as a quarterback, which is finding completions.
Yeah, it was a real revelation to me when, I don't remember who it was who said this, that they ended up narrowing the game down to just them, the receiver, and whoever's defending the receiver. And everybody else is sort of irrelevant to what they're trying to do.
It's 2 on 11, not 11 on 11.
Yeah. Seth, I was also fascinated by your in-depth reporting on quarterback dads.
Yes.
Particularly the fathers of Colin Hurley and Caleb Williams, and how your depiction of them avoids stereotype, but gives them as fathers in full in all their complexity. Eli, your story is one of family, and the effect success in football extends out into the families of your characters, Ray and her father, Moses and his grandmother. Could you each talk about those threads in your book and how, football and family and what you've observed and learned and written about.
Yeah, I mean, you can when you look at great quarterbacks, you can almost break down their stories into too much daddy or not enough. And in that way, like, quarterback is not dissimilar from a politician or a pop star, where like the celebrity and the mythology around it is so great, and the attention and the scrutiny and the pressure, that they almost have to have that kind of hole in their personality that needs constant adulation and love and support, and really almost living in a little bit of a separated state from reality, because that's how, if they really stop and think about how much pressure is on them, it might undo them. And I think that, yeah, so the quarterback dad, I mean, I write about a lot of them, from John Elway's dad to the Manning family to Caleb Williams' dad. Obviously, Caleb was the first pick in the draft by the Bears, and his dad, you know, was very involved in his career and really wanted him to try to blow up the draft and have some agency over which team picked him and which team he played for, which Caleb at the end of the day didn't want to do. So I kind of write about that journey. And then I write about a quarterback that maybe you guys haven't heard about named Colin Hurley. He was kind of my window into the current youth quarterback circuit. He wanted to be the most precocious person, you know, quarterback ever. He entered college at LSU at age 16. That's how he wanted to be on the fastest of the fast tracks. And his dad was very involved, like a lot of these dads are. And there are some scenes where, like, they live up to stereotype, right? I mean, there's a scene where his dad is yelling at the coaches in the stands and almost gets into a fight. But the premonitions that both Carl Williams and Charlie Hurley had about the ways that their son's career could go sideways ended up coming to fruition in very different ways. Like, Caleb Williams obviously had a brutal rookie year, and almost every way that they thought things could go bad for an organization like the Bears, picking your kid as the quarterback, you know, came true. For Charlie, he was worried about his son leaving to go to college so young. I mean, you know, especially with, like, you know, you played quarterback in college. I mean, just imagine going from homeschool to being a quarterback at LSU, one of the biggest and most football crazed universities that there is, and a party school. And, you know, his son does well on the football field and eventually becomes the number 2 quarterback as a true freshman, which is insane. But he also ends up in a car accident where he runs his car into a tree at 3 o'clock in the morning and ends up in the ICU. And so, as much as we want to kind of, you know, make fun of the quarterback dad, or, you know, sort of disregard them as being controlling and maniacal and too intense and too involved, it serves a purpose for some of these guys. And in my case, in this book, you know, all the quarterback dads, as crazy as they are, they end up being right about the things they were worried about.
Yeah, well, say that what you said at the very beginning. Like, it's either too much or too.
Oh, yeah.
Say that. What was?
Oh, it's like too much daddy or not enough.
And that's what produced, like, start. So, I think I had the perfect amount of daddy, and that's why I didn't go pro.
Yeah, there you go.
And he happens to be sitting right there in the orange hat for the perfect amount of dad.
There you go.
Man, like, so for families so big in Mississippi Blue 42, because you've got Ray, and Ray here was a part. She's multifaceted in how she became. So she's a former college pole vaulter at the U of A, which my wife was a pole vaulter at the U of A. So there's like this part of her. Another part is she's an FBI agent. My aunt was an FBI agent. So I had these two pieces, and then the third prong, and where it really fit into the book, is, y'all remember the film Remember the Titans? You remember Hayden Panettiere when she's the coach's daughter? I remember looking at her and always being really transfixed with that character, but also being curious as to what does this girl, what does she do with all of this football knowledge? Like, she can break down film at 10 years old, and I thought, like, what would this look like? How could she play this? And she's got this really strong relationship. So in Ray's case, she idolizes her dad, so much so that, like, she wanted to be a football coach. And he said, no, you're better, you're too good for this, you can go do, which we'll kind of learn as the book goes on. Maybe that was true, or maybe he was keeping her from seeing some of this other stuff. But the way this manifests for her is she has this retro Trapper Keeper. Y'all know those Velcro binders? And she actually, long before there was film, like Huddle, and like you had to break down teams in the moment. You had to watch like from the stands and cite tendencies and weaknesses and alignments. And so Ray's kind of learned this from her dad, and she employs it as a federal agent. It's kind of like her superpower. She sees the case, in terms of weaknesses and tendencies, and she takes it all down in this. So there's a ton. I mean, that's one part. There's Eddie Pride Jr., who he's a bag man who will do anything, for this university, even to getting his own daughter, Ella Mae Pride, who's a gridiron girl. If y'all know what a gridiron girl is, they're the ones that are ladies college students who are assigned to like high school recruits when they come on their visits to host them, to take them out to the bar. So there's all sorts of family relationships, and they mean a lot in the book.
Yeah, Seth, some of the most poignant interviews I think you have in your book are the children of the quarterbacks too, and how they deal with both the fame and frailty and shortcomings of their dads who are so lionized in the public. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, if you're going to write about quarterbacks, you can't just limit it to the ones who are alive. And so I wanted to know, it's not a history of the position, but I wanted to know how this job became so celebrated and mythologized in our culture, because it's a very odd job. And I thought that it would be kind of a slow rise from the moment the forward pass was legalized in college football in 1906. It turned out it really happened fast. And it was like almost from the moment that people saw quarterbacks and saw that they could do this, the first time they saw a spiral, it became this thing that became romanced. And so I picked certain historical characters who aren't with us anymore. Bob Waterfield, he was a quarterback, one of the most important quarterbacks is kind of overlooked by history, even though he's in the Hall of Fame. He was married to Jane Russell in the 1940s, so she was like the country's biggest pinup star in the middle of World War II. He was the country's, one of the best he was one of the best quarterbacks in the NFL and one of the best looking. And so he was kind of the first one to introduce the idea that like the quarterback could be a sex symbol. And their house in California became like the cultural collision of Hollywood and football, these two kind of emerging, American entertainment forces. And then you go to like Johnny Unitas, and he represented this kind of bedrock establishment, almost like militaristic type of leader, even though he wasn't ever in the military. Then you have Joe Namath, who of course is, 60s rebellion. And he, shows everybody, this is the life you can lead as a quarterback. And so, in talking to all those people, I wanted to, in learning about them, the Joe Namath is still here, obviously, but like I wanted to talk to their kids and try to understand like what it was like growing up with a dad who was a Hall of Fame quarterback. And, I think there were some benefits of it, some things that kind of warp you as a child. But, at the end of the day, it's cool for them. I think that like, it's a fascinating type of thing. Because one of my main, I talk about Y.A. Tittle in the book, who was a great quarterback in the 50s and 60s and kind of became the first quarterback known for losing, for being great but losing. He became the face of losing championships, even though it was really kind of unfair. And his daughter, it was funny, I would interview Y.A. Tittle when he was still alive, and he had really bad dementia. And we would try to trigger his memory by showing him old newspaper clips of his career. And he'd look at his name and he'd say, Yelberton Abraham Tittle. What a horrible name. And then he'd look at me and he'd say, what's your name again? I'd be like, sir, because he couldn't remember, and I'd be like, sir, it's Seth Wickersham. And he goes, Seth Wickersham? Jesus Christ, that's worse than Yelverton Abraham Tittle. But I think that like just growing up in a family where other people looked at their dads in a certain way was a really magical, mystical, and occasionally really heartbreaking type of childhood.
I guess one surprising thread that I found in both books that really fascinated me was the treatment of religion. And Eli Spear Taylor, your evangelical Christian coach, kind of starts out as a satirical portrait, but it evolves into a very touching and in some ways honorable portrait of the believing Christian and faithful Christian and what kind of roads he should take. And I found that fascinating. And the FCA and the organizations that honor sort of the Christian athletes. Seth, you covered that with Kirk Cousins and his being given an award from the FCA. Can you just talk about and I think the role of religion as a part of football is somewhat, we often hear the players at the end of a game, thank their Lord and Savior Jesus Christ, Well,
it's as symbolic with football as the military now, which is really something, for a football game.
Yeah, well, like even the fact that we do all that stuff has nothing to do with military. But even like a public university, like a college football game, it's not but as a football guy who was coaching at the high school level, it was always you have separation of church and state, and but then there's this whole thing when it comes to high school football where Christianity was ingrained in it. And what I really wanted to do with Spear Taylor was take the things that were real, take the things that have actually been reported on. And that was really kind of a lot of fun I had with the whole book, was taking some of those things as jumping off places and then playing them. But I had especially fun with this and Spear. At one point, Spear he's baptizing players after practice in their ice baths, which was done. That was actually done. And if you don't know, you can go find out where. And that's kind of the fun of the book, is I hope if you read it, then you'll be digging in and thinking wait, is he making this part up? But as the book goes on, there are places where that absolute belief, like a true believer, I don't know. I mean, for me, I was really just trying, there's a big scene in the injury tent at the end of at the Cotton Bowl where Spear is just really, he's gone beyond coach, and he becomes, in his mind, he's a prophet, like an Old Testament prophet, and it's happening in this injury tent. And so I don't know, man. I just really, personally, I thought it was really funny. It was just one of the things that I thought was the most funny part of the book. So it was,
I won't. There were several laugh out loud lines with Spear Taylor. I won't give any of them away, so you can.
Well, the great thing is just that he's such a good writer, and his book is so satirical, but also so true that sometimes you don't wonder if you're trying to be funny or not. Should I be laughing right now? When I wrote about quarterbacks and religion, I take a brief detour in the book, but to me, it's an acknowledgement of the limits of what you can do as a quarterback. And, we all look at quarterbacks like they're supposed to do everything. They're controlling everything with strings when they have a big say in what happens, but they don't have all the say. And yet, they're the face of the loss. They're the face of victory if it happens. They get so much more scrutiny and so much more pressure. And so I wanted, when we talk about religion in sports, it's often kind of talked about, does God really care about what happens in a football game? But I wanted to take, a very religious quarterback at his word. And I did want to know how religion helps him, because every quarterback who hits a certain level of notoriety needs an outlet, whether it's, driving fast or women or Instagram or Twitter, or if you're Tom Brady, avocado ice cream. And, but some of them, turn to religion because they know inherently that there's limits to what they can do, and to try to deal with those insecurities, that's where they turn. And so that was my idea with the book, is that, in that part of the book, it's as powerful as quarterbacks are, there is a line where we reach where, they can't do everything, even though we think that they can.
Do you think that grounds players, more like Patrick Mahomes, for instance, such a big star, but maybe that will help him avoid some of the pitfalls that...
Well, it's one of the most interesting things. Yeah, I mean, Patrick Mahomes is very religious. You don't think about that with him. He doesn't, but he literally wears it on, well, not on his sleeve, but on his leg. I mean, he has a tattoo, but we look at someone like Patrick Mahomes, who's so physically gifted, and then on top of it, he's incredibly driven and incredibly bright, and we think, he's blessed. And he kind of acknowledges that, but gives, credit to a higher power. And, I do think that, again, there's this great documentary, I think it's called Gossip, but I saw it on a plane. I watched half of it on the way to a destination and half of it on the way back. But it's a history of gossip columns in America, and especially gets into the tabloids in New York. And so I was just starting writing or researching this book when I watched it, and when gossip columns started, they had, this woman who was a legendary gossip columnist saying, we looked for politicians, especially Kennedys, actors, actresses, and quarterbacks. I just was like, wow. So clearly this job, because of its place in the firmament, it carries a certain level that, you have to ground yourself somewhere. And you have Patrick Mahomes. Look, his brother has been a nuisance at times. His dad has gotten into legal problems. And Patrick, with all of this attention on him, never has. And I think that, no matter what you think about religion in your life, if he believes that it can be a grounding and stabilizing force for him, I think that was the lens that I was looking for when I was doing this.
In both books, there's that poignant search for meaning after football as well, with Moses McLeod, who is supremely talented, but almost doesn't want it, and something more. There's something else that means something more to him, and that was, your kind of roundup of all the great quarterbacks sitting around, talking about what it meant to them and how they're going to be eventually erased from public memory. Was such an eye-opening realization that they're going to be non-quarterbacks longer than they will be quarterbacks, and some of them take refuge in religion, some take it in their families, some take it in business, starting new businesses, and it's really fascinating how ephemeral that fame is.
They have to slay that person. I mean, you literally have to kill who you were to have a chance for, number one, your legend to kind of rise free, but number two, for you to just be able to move on with your life. I mean, imagine if everyone looked at you for something you did when you were 32 years old. For the rest of your life, you're fixed in that person's memory for what you did then. And look, that's a cool way to go through life in a lot of ways. In a lot of ways, it's really hard. And on top of it, you're dealing with, and I think it's an interesting parallel to your book, but the rush, the high of being a quarterback is so intense. It's so intense. Like Bruce Springsteen comes back from tours and drops into a depression. Like he's talked about this because he's the center of a universe out there, and then you come home and you're like a highly paid chauffeur. And for quarterbacks, Springsteen has another tour. Like quarterbacks, their career, there's no next game. It's done. And so you really have to figure out a way to move on. And that is such a struggle for people. And in some ways, they don't. You can never truly leave it. I was with Joe Namath at this event in Alabama, and this one was in New York, and I asked him, knowing everything you know about being a quarterback, and he's he's in the chain, he's a link in the chain of, American luminaries. He's had that big of an impact. knowing everything you know about being a quarterback, would you want to do it again? And he kind of looked at me. He was like, I don't know. He was like, I have to think about that. But thank God I'm still here. And I thought that was so interesting, especially to your contrast, because Moses, so much of your book is a reflection of this incredibly, it's this college football system that we lived with for so long that only with the distance from it do you realize how insane it was and how ridiculous it was and how unfair it was. And that's someone who's almost like so burnt out on what he had to do just to get through being college as a quarterback, being one of the only people in the world who could not cash in on image, name, and likeness were American college athletes until the Supreme Court opened the door for them to be able to do so. And he is almost like, I'm done with this, because like I've seen this from the inside and I'm done.
Yeah, and that's the deal with Moses. So when the book came out in August, and I would go around, and I was on like 15 days of going different places, and I always bring up NIL, and it was always amazing to me, the amount of just like things people in the crowd would be like, it's killing college football, and I'd get these very guttural reactions about players getting paid. And this was a lot before people had read the book, and now that's been the goal. Because, Moses is a part of a system. So Moses is the quarterback when Matt Talley, when the ramifications of Matt Talley seeing Brett Favre and then winning that game, let's just say Matt Talley's no longer the starter, and Moses becomes the new guy. And Moses is a kid who's not touching any of this dirty money. He refuses to take payments for fear of losing his career, because this whole system was set up where not only could they not get paid, but they were still getting snuck bags of money in Waffle House parking lots. And then if they got caught with that money from Eddie Pride Jr., who has no affiliation with the university, it doesn't have won't blow back on the university, it's the player. It was the player. So Moses is this highly aware, very driven, has a goal of becoming a veterinarian of all things, and he wants to do this on his own, on his own term. And so, I had a blast just kind of showing him, and then by the end, a spoiler, no spoiler, I won't give a spoiler, but I was telling Seth before we came out here that Moses' final act, his final action, it was, and if you've read the book, what he does at the last play of the Cotton Bowl, it was the idea, for the entire book.
And I would just say that, like, building off of that, like, it does burn people out, as great as this job is. Like, when I was with Steve Young for it, and I asked him, like, if you're the starting quarterback for a professional football team, what are all the hats you have to wear? And it's like everything from spokesperson for a multi-billion-dollar organization, Marine General, matinee idol, chief philanthropist, breathtaking jerk, amateur psychologist, chief cheerleader, all these things. He got to 17, and then we would keep talking, and he would like, there's more, you got to do this, that. And it's like, it takes a certain person to be able to handle that and to, make it the most important thing in your life. And like Andrew Luck was a great quarterback in Stanford, really good quarterback in the NFL. He's most famous for retiring because he walked away at age 29. And I spent a ton of time with him for an ESPN story and for a little bit for the book. But, he was injured a lot. And when he was injured, he got to, for the first time in his life, take a step back and look at his life. And he didn't like who he was as a quarterback. And when he came back from his injury, he was like, I'm going to try to be a person that I actually like and be a pro quarterback. He did it pretty well for 1 year, then he got hurt again, and as soon as he became hurt again, he was getting pulled. Remember in Star Wars with the tractor beam? Like the Death Star was pulling Andrew Luck back to him to this place where he was just a breathtaking, I see there's kids out there, so I got to watch my language, but he was a breathtaking jerk, and he knew that the world had to revolve around him for him to be a successful quarterback, and he realized, I don't like who I am doing that. I don't like who I am as a husband doing that. He was an expected father. He didn't think that was going to work well with parenthood. And, that was the real reason why he walked away.
And I had one thing on this too that I forgot. I told Seth too, and this to me, the most moving parts of his book are when you see this part that he's talking about, when you see after the last play and they go, and it was the part for me personally, as a guy who had played football and then coached football, and then football, my life was constructed around seasons and off seasons and Friday nights and Saturday nights and total preparation for all this. And then it was gone, you know, like at 29 years old, it was gone. And the reason it was gone was because I'd become a head football coach. And when I was a head football coach, I coached for 2 seasons, and we went 1-19 in those 2 seasons. And so if I were in Seth's book, you know, what the interesting thing is that had we even gone 500, like had we even won half our games, I think I'd probably still be coaching football. But because we lost, like, it's why I'm here. You know, like I filled that football-shaped hole in my heart with writing. I was trying to write my way back through it.
Well, great. Thank you, guys. We're going to open it up for audience questions now. And if you can, please come to one of the microphones on either side and ask away.
All right, Seth, forgive me. This is an Arkansas literary question. I got to know from Jay, how do you think Charles Portis would react to reading Mississippi Blue 42?
That's a big... That was for you.
For me? No. I think he'd say what he would say about just about anybody who asked him what he thought of what they'd written. He'd say, yeah, it's all right.
Well, and he's not lying, because when I very first wrote the first version of my debut novel, Don't Know Tough, I printed it off. I had my wife, who's like a internet ninja, find Charles Portis's home address, and I mailed it to him in like 2017. And he wasn't able to read at the time, so his brother John had read it out loud to him a couple times, and then they wrote up this super sweet response, and now that is framed above my desk. Yeah.
I feel like what's so interesting to me about quarterbacks that I'd love for y'all to talk about is, unlike like Bruce Springsteen or other things where people pursue fame, this is football in general. There's no chance of, you know, breaking your spine or, you know, getting seriously injured. But with football, that's like every single time they go to play. And I'd love to hear about how that sort of impacts the players, just knowing every play in the game you could have a career-ending injury.
When we were eating, he showed me the clip of, was it Iowa State? The quarterback?
Yeah.
The quarterback got smoked today. I mean, really a big hit. And we were just talking about, you know, that part of the game. And I thought it was really interesting what Seth said, and I totally understood it. He said, I kind of missed that part of it. And, you know, the French say it like this, la petite mort, which just means the little death. You know, there's something about, and I can find it a little bit. I can tap into a little bit when I play pickup basketball. And, you know, we'll play, and I'm getting close to 40 and running really hard and hurting and just not thinking about anything else. So, yes, it's violent, and it comes with its own set of risks. But so did driving here. Like when you guys got here, you know, today, you took a risk. So it kind of makes it more beautiful to me in a way because of what's on the line. Yeah.
Well, you know this better than I, but as a quarterback, you cannot walk out on the field and feel doubt. And so you have to get yourself to a mental place, and it is sometimes a dark process, which I get into with the book. But like getting yourself to a place where you walk out on the field and you're not scared and you're confident can be almost as challenging as the game itself. And in the book, there's a quarterback I write about named Alex Smith, who was the first pick for the 49ers, I think in 2005. And he he had an injury that I thought was just an interesting injury. Because, like, look, if you break your leg or you blow out your knee, everyone knows you're hurt. And he hurt his shoulder, his throwing shoulder. And it was what was called a grade 3 shoulder separation. And everyone told him this is a matter of pain tolerance. Which, if you're in a football, it's like the worst thing you can hear if you're a member of a football team, because basically, like, everyone's looking at you like, if you can man up, you're good. And once you're on the field, there's no such thing as being injured. Like, you have to be able to play to your standard. And so he wanted to live up to expectations, even though every time he threw, his shoulder clicked and something was wrong. It eventually got to the point where they had to tape down his collarbone to keep it from popping up as he threw for him to get ready to play. And, you know, he didn't want it to, he kept telling everybody, I'm fine, I'm fine, I'm fine, when he was like in his own private hell, because the code of football and the code of injuries, which is that if you start a game, you finish it and you don't complain, all of these things were so hardwired in him that it was almost really destructive. Like, at some point he just had to say, I am really hurt, I can't do this anymore. And once he did that, it was like the locker room kind of understood him in a way that when he was playing through injury and torturing himself, you know, they were viewing him not on a curve at all.
Seth, there was he in this same section of the book, he gives a list of like injuries that are like acceptable, like injuries that you should play through, and then there's the ones that you can't play. And I thought it was absolutely perfect. Like, do you got any of that off the top of your head? Like, no?
I don't remember them all, but
it was just like, you know, like a high ankle sprain, you know, that was like something that you could play through. And then there was, you know, like a broken leg or a, you know, compound fracture, like you're out. But there's, on that spectrum, there's all these in-betweens. And as a player, it's really up to you, you know.
Yeah, and like, you know, do you have an injury in your throwing shoulder or your non-throwing, like all these things. You know, John Elway played his entire career with no cartilage in one of his knees, and he was a running quarterback. I mean, you know, he was just able to do that, and it is one of the biggest gray areas in pro football and in quarterbacks. And like, and it's also just a weird job. Like Kurt Warner, Hall of Fame quarterback, nearly had his entire career derailed because he had a thumb injury that just would not heal. And I mean, a thumb injury is a catastrophic injury for a quarterback, and yet, like, you know, what would you think if your team is playing in the Super Bowl or whatever it might be, and the quarterback pulls out of the game because of a thumb injury? You're like, come on, this can't be. But it's like, that is the thing. That is the thing. Like I went to the Clinton Museum when I was here, and like I forgot that before he won the first time, he lost his voice. Like, imagine being a presidential candidate, and days before the election, you lose your voice. Like, that's what a thumb injury is to a quarterback before a big game.
Seth, thanks so much for coming to Arkansas on a Saturday, and thanks Eli for being an ambassador for Arkansas so well. Enjoyed both y'all's books. Seth, question for you. You talked a lot about that transition of Hall of Famers trying to have a life after football. Who of all the quarterbacks you've interviewed, talked to, who has done that seemingly the best? I mean, in my mind, I kind of think of Steve Young, but then I always see him on TV talking about football, even after he's retired. But he seems like a very successful.
So Young's hero is Roger Staubach. There's a moment in the book where Young is playing in the NFC Championship game against the Cowboys, and they bring out Staubach to be the honorary captain for the coin flip, and the Cowboys did it knowing that Steve would just melt. And he'd be like, Roger, you're my hero. And he does that in the middle of the field before this big game, and Roger's like, no, we'll talk about it later, Steve. But Roger told him, like, when you quit playing, you got to run from the game. Don't walk, run. And Roger probably has become the most successful businessman ever who's a successful quarterback. You know, Steve ran away from the game. He got into private equity, but he also stayed in it, which was kind of interesting. But, you know, he's one of those guys that I think is probably better adjusted than a lot of guys. It probably helped that he wasn't married when he played, because he could be completely and unaccountably selfish. Which is, look, I know we were laughing, but I mean, it's just true. It's just like, that's one of the reasons why I think that like some of these guys struggle when the game ends, because it's not only just like the rush of the game and the, you know, the purity of competing, but it's like the world doesn't revolve around you that way anymore. And when I went to Elite 11, which is this high school quarterback showcase, one of the guys who was there was like, look, we're just breeding little a-holes. And he meant it, and he was kind of, because we focus so much on quarterbacks that it's like their reality is getting warped at such a young age because this skill set is so valuable. But even with Steve, who, you know, I think has been about as healthy away from the game as possible, there's this moment where he goes back to BYU for an alumni weekend, and someone runs into him, and they're like, hey, are you going to play in the alumni game tonight? And he's like, no. He's like, I'm 62 years old. I don't play football anymore. Like, I'm done. And then he was like, well, you know, it's a Friday night. It's at a stadium. You know, there's actually people in the stadium. It's under the lights. You know, it's that stage. You don't get that stage back. And he goes out, throws an interception. And, you know, the alumni game is like everywhere from 22-year-olds to him. So there's a big range of age range in this game. So he goes out, throws an interception on the very first drive. The other BYU quarterbacks get their turns in, and then he gets the last drive, and he drives them down the field, and he throws a beautiful touchdown to win the game. And people lift him on their shoulders. I mean, it looked like, if you go and pull the clip of him winning the Super Bowl, it was very similar. He looks the same. And he was in bed that night, and you know, he was staring at his phone like we all do, and someone sent him a clip of him throwing that pass. It was taken from behind him, and so it was this great view of him throwing this beautiful pass. His fundamentals look great, and so even Steve, as accomplished and as like healthy distance away from the game as possible, he watched that play like 30 times that night. And that's why I say, like, we all have a little Uncle Rico in us.
All right, maybe time for one more question.
Yeah, switching from talking about football to talking about book publishing, and Seth, this is particularly for you since you wrote a nonfiction book. Did you send out a proposal first, and then
I'm
let
the
a
worst.
publisher tell you what they wanted, or did you write the book first?
I'm the worst one to ask. My first book on the New England Patriots, they came to me. I had done a lot of work with ESPN, so they came to me to do it. So I really didn't write a proposal. And then for the quarterback book, my proposal was 4 paragraphs.
Who'd you send it to?
I sent it to an editor that I knew wanted to publish it. So I always feel like I'm the worst example of book writing because I don't know what it's like to do. And I'm thinking about my 3rd book at the moment, and I was like, oh my God. I was thinking about this just yesterday. I was like, God, am I going to have to write a proposal? Like, I've managed to like avoid that. So maybe, I don't know, you can I have read proposals though. And I will say that like the successful ones I found, I've read nonfiction proposals, and you know, the successful ones are ones that show that you have an ability to write, an ability to know story. I think that that's really important. And, you know, I think you answer a question that the publisher has, which is, you know, why are you the one to do this book? And, you know, it's a feel you get from the writing that answers that question. I don't think they ever say like, you know, I could say I'm the one to write this book on the New England Patriots because I've worked at ESPN and I've been in Tom Brady's living room and I've written stories that have pissed off Bill Belichick, you know, whatever it is. But like the real, you get it, you communicate that, I think, when you read the prose, and someone can just tell how much you care. And when you care about something, you know, there's a conviction in the writing, not a glossing over of things, but just a conviction to it that I think is kind of visceral.
Thank you.
And you get that from the first chapter, I don't know if it's the prologue or whatever, of your own experience as a quarterback in Alaska. That really sets the stakes, for you as a writer early.
Well, and it was really embarrassing because I write about, when quarterback ended for me. And then I zoom out and these are the big questions. What life might I have lived, And I tell it through those 5 characters. But at the end, I got a drink with the guy who played center on our high school team. And Jesus Christ, we're in our 40s. Like, we're talking, and I just couldn't help it. It was so embarrassing. But I'm like, why do you think I didn't make it as a quarter? I mean, it's like no matter how many times I've heard glory days, I can't help it. And I'm doing this. And I'm like, why do you think I didn't make it as a quarterback? And he answered as if he had thought about it. And it actually allowed me to forgive my teenage self in a way that was a true surprise to me throughout this process.
All right, let's give these guys a big hand.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you guys for coming. And we'll be out. We'll let them go out to the signing tables out here, and you all can see them again there, buy your books, and get them signed. Thank you for coming.